Hey El Paso, thank you so much for checking out the live episode. We've done this in the past and they're not as easy as you would think, but I think we've got it a little bit more dialed in this time. We'd love to do one once a month and kind of just ramp them up and make them even more interesting and fun. So thanks so much for checking it out. By all means, please consider sharing any kind of comments or questions that you have. That's, of course, why we do this. But what we thought we were going to do for this episode is we wanted to talk a little bit about kind of the El Paso economy. An interesting new study just kind of came out about the economy, but there's also some really interesting things happening in Juarez. And so without much more blabbing on about that, I'm going to turn it over to Alejandro, and he's going to talk about some of the new developments that are happening across the border from us.
Yeah, like you mentioned, John, I don't know if people have noticed, there's two actual buildings that are happening, construction now in Juarez. One of them, mainly, I think from El Paso, it's visible. If you go on an I-10 ride by the border, there's going to be a major eyesore, right? There's a big building. It's pretty much going to be a surveillance building for, I guess, Juarez, but also El Paso. It's called Torre Centinela, which is basically means Sentinel Tower. Again, very big building. It's pretty much going to be about half a mile from Paseo Norte International Bridge, right next to the Bull Ring, right there in Juarez. The purpose of it is pretty much, they're trying to enhance the security and surveillance across the state. It's going to be 20 stories high. It's going to be the tallest building in Ciudad Juarez, and it's going to cost around $200 million. Again, super crazy surveillance. They're going to have 10,000 surveillance cameras, facial recognition, automatic license plates readers, drones, live feed cameras owned by neighborhood businesses and residents. Now, it's going to be in a collaboration with the Texas authorities, allowing the shared surveillance data to monitor activities on both the sides of the U.S.-Mexico border. They started the construction of this building in mid-2022, and they're thinking about having it ready by this year, 2025. It is obviously causing for some people a little bit of concern, right, privacy-wise, especially on both sides of the border. But again, that's what I think the main thing they want to do is just, enhance the security and having all that technology with AI. I think it's pretty interesting. And again, I've seen it a couple times driving by the I-10, and I've always wondered what it is. So I think it's very interesting. The other building that I want to talk about is a little bit more real estate-y, some of the things that we might be a little bit more used to it. This building is a little bit deeper in Juarez. It's called Quorum. I think I said that correctly. It's basically a big building designed for mixed use. It's going to incorporate commercial spaces, offices, and residential units. Now, this building is pretty tall. It's going to be the tallest building in El Paso and Juarez. It started at 130 meters. That was the original plan. But then they just say that they're going to update it to up to 150 meters. It's going to have 35 floors, 98 apartments, 63 offices, commercial spaces, and a Marriott hotel. Like I said, making it the tallest building in the border region. They started this just last year in 2024. And they expect that this is going to be done by 2026. Again, on the right side, as you can see, is going to be the Marriott Hotel. There's going to be a lot of amenities. I think restaurants, pools. There's going to be gym. There's going to be some office space as well. And then the top 19 stories is going to be the apartment complex or the building, the condos, right? The condos start around $150,000. I'm sure you're going to get really nice views. And it's, pretty fancy building, in my opinion. So it's interesting to see how quick, these condos sell and what people in Juarez think about this big project. So I think those are the two interesting things that are happening in Juarez construction-wise. Again, this one, we can't see it from El Paso that well, but the surveillance tower, it's definitely very visible. So I thought it was pretty interesting.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. They're also doing something down by the border, kind of across from UTEP, like by the river. Like they're I wanted to get some footage of it. I just couldn't really get that close, but there's a bunch of bulldozers down there. They're moving a bunch of dirt around. I don't know if it's like some kind of like piping stuff, something for the river, but there's definitely some construction going on as well, kind of down by that border area too. So maybe we'll get some more information, or if anybody knows what's going on there, by all means, let us know. But so definitely some interesting things happening right across the border from us. And speaking about us, let's talk about the El Paso economy. Recently, a report came out by the Borderplex Economic Outlook to 2026, and I just kind of pulled some of the things that I thought were most interesting, kind of like just like a window into kind of how the economy is doing as far as kind of last year and then how it's projected to look this year. I think it's always just kind of interesting to see what it is. So I've got some slides, so we'll put those up. So they started off with this statement: El Pasoans are expected to carry more cash and spend more this year, a result of increased worker productivity and employers paying higher wages and salaries. And so that's, pretty good news. The idea that, people in the city who are working are going to have more disposable income is great. We're going to talk about unemployment, things like that. But here's the next one. It says they're projecting for this year. Actually, that's supposed to be 2025. Per capita personal income is projected to reach more than $49,400 a year. Okay, so for one person, the average person working in El Paso this year, 25, on average, $49,400. Now, that's a 5.2% increase over last year. So that obviously suggests that wages are growing, which is great. One of the things we always kind of talk about is that the minimum wage, as we know, is Texas uses the federal minimum wage, I think $7.25, which certainly isn't good. But it does sound like, for the most part, people in El Paso are doing good. I thought this next one was interesting because, Las Cruces is kind of the closest place to us. It says in Las Cruces, personal incomes are expected to reach more than $49,000. So not quite as much as El Paso, and not quite the percentage increase of that 4.7, whereas in El Paso we saw over 5%. So all of that is, pretty good news. Next one here I thought was interesting. It said kind of post-COVID, so this is from 2021 to 2024, wages and salaries increased, especially for blue-collar and semi-skilled professions because the labor force shrank. So two things here. So, of course, blue-collar workers, that's typically folks that are, making, not necessarily like the white-collar office jobs, but then semi-skilled professions, they're talking things like construction workers, HVAC technicians, electricians, plumbers, forklift operators, welders. Healthcare is doing pretty good too. Medical assistants, CNAs, that does kind of obviously make sense. In El Paso, transportation is pretty big, warehousing is pretty big, healthcare is always pretty big. So it makes sense that obviously construction too, residential and commercial. So it makes sense that people in those industries would be doing well. But the thing I found interesting, it says that those wages and salaries increased because the labor force shrank. I looked a little bit into that, but I couldn't really find any information on that. So I'd be curious if anybody has thoughts, like why did the labor force shrink? So that one's still a little bit of a question mark for me. But next one, real quick, let's just talk about commercial activity. It says El Paso's commercial activity is projected to pass $20 billion in 2025, a new high and a 3.2% increase. So, let's be honest, that's great news, commercial activity. Again, a lot of probably cross-border deal making and goods coming in and out of El Paso and Juarez. So commercial activity increasing is certainly a good thing. I talked about a little bit a couple years ago, this idea that we were on an economic path to kind of going away from kind of like a global economy and moving more towards kind of a national, a local economy. There's this idea of nearshoring. So instead of us as Americans getting all of our goods, our stuff from, say, China or overseas, we were trying to bring a lot of that manufacturing closer to us. And so it can't get it can't get any closer really than Mexico. So a lot of that commercial activity, that 20 billion, I imagine is a result of a lot of that kind of manufacturing industry that's happening. So now here's another one. This is pretty interesting. Now, this one starts with an if, okay? If inflation increases, let's talk about houses just a little bit here. That will suppress the demand for homes. So in January, the median sales price for a house in El Paso was about $265,000. That's a 2.1 increase over 12 months. Super interesting. So kind of shows that, I've talked about this a ton too, but kind of during COVID, post-COVID, we saw record home cost appreciation in the neighborhood of about 15% year over year for about 2 years in a row. So that's astronomical. Everybody's like, oh, why are houses so expensive now in El Paso? It used to be really affordable. Well, unfortunately, one of the outcomes of the pandemic is that interest rates came down. Everybody and their mother could afford a home loan and wanted to buy a house, which drove the price of homes up about 30%. However, that's passed, and now we're kind of back to, as you can see here, kind of normal appreciation year over year, 2 to 4%. And last year, home prices again increased by about 2%. So the first part, if inflation increases, unfortunately, if inflation increases like it had in the past, it's just going to mean that the interest rates stay elevated. Right now, mortgage rates are around 7%, so it's harder for a lot of folks to qualify for a home loan. So that's what they're talking about with all of that. This is just an interesting stat I didn't know. The number of households is expected to reach about $310,000 this year, a 0.8% increase from last year. So number of households, people who own their homes. And so, just an interesting kind of number to know. So it did grow, but, it barely grew 1%. So that one feels like kind of a meh right there to me. So let's talk about the economy as far as kind of jobs. So unemployment rate in El Paso was 4% in December of last year and expected to rise to 4.6%. That doesn't shock me too much. In the scheme of things, unemployment is still pretty good in our country. And I've got a couple of slides coming up where it shows how we compare to like Texas, national, as far as unemployment goes. But this slide at least does kind of suggest that unemployment may increase. So of course that's never exactly good news, but here is some good news. Next slide is what job areas seem to be improving. If you're a young person or considering a career change, maybe this is something to think about. But the jobs that seem to be improving, transportation, I think is always going to be a pretty good industry here. One, we're right on that kind of east-west corridor of I-10. We're pretty geographically isolated, and so a lot of transportation goods come through us. And then of course, since we're on the border, it does definitely sort of sound like that helps us as well. I'm just reading one of these comments. Do you know if these economic projections take into account the Trump administration plans for possible tariffs? That's a fantastic question, and I believe the answer is no. Typically, my understanding is that the way that these reports come together is that they accumulate all of this data, most likely from last year. It takes them a couple of months to put it all together. And so, especially since the administration is so new, I can't imagine that they've really had the ability or the time to factor what might happen into this. So that's a great question, and I'm just going to go with, I don't think this report necessarily does take into account anything, since the administration, since the election. So, but thank you for the question. Other jobs that are improving, warehousing. Man, if you've been over by Horizon, tons of new warehousing. And if you've been over to Santa Teresa, again, tons of additional warehousing. So again, taking advantage of that nearshoring with Mexico, warehousing is definitely doing good. This one I thought was kind of interesting. Hotel and food services. Food services, I can see that. Hotels, man, I don't know. I just never get the sense that our hotels are booming. I don't mean to sound negative, but I can't imagine, especially in the dead of winter, how the hotels could be doing well. You know what I mean? who's coming. I don't see a bunch of conferences or anything like that. So, what do I know? And then the other area that is doing good is healthcare, which I think is always going to be an industry that's pretty safe. The medical assistants, CNAs, doctors, nurses are going to do pretty good. So, next one is jobs in the manufacturing sector are decreasing. This one I found super interesting because another one, jobs in the manufacturing sector decreasing. It kind of is at odds with the idea that manufacturing is doing well, that warehousing is supporting that. But this is interesting. It says because of the manufacturing sector relying more on software and machines to create products. Now, I have a theory that as AI begins to mature, that's certainly going to replace a lot of folks potentially in the software sector. So maybe they're speaking to that. And then as we see automation taking off, think, back in the day of Ford was the first one who started, the automation along the assembly line. Now we've come pretty far. And so the idea that robotics and technology are potentially replacing real jobs in the manufacturing sector, that doesn't surprise me either. So, the good news is that manufacturing is doing well. The potentially negative news, though, is that it's becoming so automated that it's not employing as many people that it did in the past. What was the comment to?
Ryan says, hello, Ryan says, incoming tariffs on Mexico will hurt both our economies in El Paso and Juarez.
If you've been following the news, you know that Trump said, hey, we're going to put a 25% tariff on incoming goods from Mexico and Canada, but then they put a 1-month hold on that. I think those now are projected to come into play on March 3rd. I did see an interesting article somewhere about how, Mexico's president kind of played the situation pretty well as far as negotiating with Trump, that both of them came away relatively happy, even Trump saying, I kind of like this person. So I think it remains to be seen whether or not the tariffs do come to fruition and whether or not they're 25% or if they're less. But of course, tariffs are certainly a hot political topic. Some people think that they'll do wonders for our economy, which would be great. Other people feel like it would have the opposite effect, which wouldn't be good. So I think it's really hard to say exactly how it will play out and whether or not it will play out. But I think in 1-2 weeks, we're going to have a pretty good idea of whether or not those tariffs are going to take place. But I'm sure there are folks out there, and everybody has their own take on that. So let's talk about, I just got a couple more for you, some potentially negative things when it comes to the economy. Inflationary risks, and this is for the whole country, but inflationary risks could lead to more expensive everything, right? That's what inflation is. As inflation increases, keep in mind, not so long ago, we were up at 9%. Everything is more expensive, right? Everybody's been talking about eggs. As a real estate agent, I can't believe I haven't seen this meme recently, but there's all these jokes about, instead of being paid your commission, you know what I mean? And you should be paid in eggs. So inflationary risks, just basically mean that things could be more expensive, which nobody wants. And it certainly suggests that housing affordability would be decreased. So that's nothing new. We've been dealing with that kind of since things cooled off in the really hot market from COVID. Ever since then, housing has been less affordable because when the interest rates go from 3% to say 7%, it just means you're paying so much more money in interest to purchase a home. So that one is pretty straightforward. But here's I think an interesting one as well. So Texas economy on this next one is, so the Texas job growth is 1.7%. This is number 13, I think, Miguel. So Texas job growth compared to other states, 1.7% in 1 year. Not too bad, right? It outdid the national job growth. So in the nation, job growth last year increased by about 1.3%. Beaumont, I haven't been to Beaumont, but their job growth was 4.9%. I meant to do a little bit of research and find out why Beaumont's blowing up, but I totally forgot about it until I just saw this slide. So I'm sure somebody out there knows something must be happening in Beaumont because they're blowing up. But you can see, while we may not be Beaumont level job growth, El Paso did pretty darn good, better than the state of Texas and better than the national average with 2.1%. So, that's pretty promising. And then just two more ones here. Just kind of an interesting thing. Texas is actually the #1 exporting state in the nation, and Mexico is Texas's #1 trading partner. So when Ryan was asking about, are tariffs going to be good? Are they going to be bad? I think, of course, he was suggesting that they're not going to be great. Something to keep in mind is that Mexico is Texas's #1 trading partner. So, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. And then this last slide, I just thought it was kind of interesting. I know a lot of people are like, especially younger people, I would guess, are, like what jobs actually pay the best. So here's just a couple for you. So now these hourly wages, these are entry starting level wages. So data scientist, 21 an hour, civil engineer, electrical engineer, information security analyst, starting at over 31 a year. This one was interesting. Dental hygienist, over 31 a year. Physical therapy assistants, a little more of that healthcare. So I just thought that one was kind of interesting, just so you could see how everybody's doing. So that's kind of just a real quick, I think, overview of El Paso's economy. For the most part, I mean, I'd say it's pretty strong. Of course, there are risks. Of course, there are fears about what could happen, what might happen. But at the same time, if the past is any predictor, El Paso is doing, pretty well. And I've always thought that geographically located here on the border with Juarez, with Mexico being a strong trading ally, that, El Paso is poised to do pretty well. And while, of course, housing affordability isn't great right now anywhere in the country, with a median sales home price of $265,000, I mean, you're going to be hard pressed to find that type of affordability in any other city of our size. I think the average home price in Texas is just around $400. So as you can see, we're well below that. Randy, I see your emails all the time. Says, do you know if these economic projections take into account? Oh yeah, the Trump, no. So yeah, like I said, this does not take into account any projections of what might happen in the current administration. So so that's kind of my couple cents about the economy. Alex, any thoughts about that?
No, I mean, I do suspect that, the economy, at least for El Paso overall, is going to be, pretty decent. It always seems to be, if it's the military, if it's whatever, there's always seems to be growth happening here. And a lot of people are asking me, hey, what do you think about El Paso? Like when it comes down to, prices of homes and mainly like appreciation, like are things going to go down in price? And I think that's a fear that people have in every state and every city, but I just don't see it with the growth that it's happening in El Paso, with the growth of the military base and everything that they're doing. I just don't, I don't see that happening. But again, we don't know nothing, right? We just have to wait to see how it plays out, and we can just, hope for the best. Randy did leave another comment. He said, FYI, my wife is a PT assistant in El Paso, and the rates we've seen in the area are a lot higher than $22 per hour.
That's awesome. Yeah. Yeah, that's great. My wife also works in healthcare, and she says that right now On a broader kind of general level, that healthcare workers are in demand, no doubt. Why? Because we have an aging population, right? All of the boomers are transitioning on, into old age, right? And so people are living longer. So when people live longer and there's a ton of them at that kind of retirement age and potentially developing health issues, I mean, there's going to be a demand for people to take care of them and, all the rest of us. And then another interesting thing I think for El Paso is that what I've heard is that since El Paso is kind of geographically isolated, and you could say, how do you say this nicely? I don't want to say boring, but I recently saw on Instagram somebody posted how like we recently were ranked as like one of the most boring cities of our size. And yeah, I mean, I can see that, right? We don't have any major sports teams, right? So it's not like, we're going to an LA Lakers game, you know what I mean, downtown. There isn't a ton of like concert venues here. Like we typically, unfortunately, don't get like really big name concerts, like Taylor Swift isn't coming to El Paso, right? Yeah, so anyway, what I've heard is that in order to entice doctors and nurses and healthcare workers to actually come and live in our community and work in the community, that how do you entice people? You entice them with wages and salaries. And so, to Randy's point, yeah, that makes total sense to me. So pretty interesting. I guess actually this is a good segue though. Speaking of El Paso, maybe not having the stuff that other cities tend to have, let's talk about this Deck Plaza project. We did some social media posting on it, and people definitely have their opinions. Miguel, can you play let's play these little slideshows. So what you're seeing here is an example of what El Paso is considering doing downtown. Essentially, this is the Deck Plaza in Dallas, okay? So in downtown, as you know, if you live here or you've driven through here, Interstate 10 goes through the center of downtown, and there's probably like 5 to 8 block stretch kind of where I-10 kind of goes under and through El Paso. And what they're talking about doing is kind of creating this big deck that goes over Interstate 10 and connects the two sides of downtown. So let's say, people from Sunset Heights could walk over into downtown, and you could park downtown and walk over Interstate 10 through this Deck Plaza to get towards Sunset Heights and what have you. So a couple little notes, but there's a lot of opinions. A lot of people are like, no, that's a stupid, terrible idea. Don't spend our taxpayer money on that. And then I've seen a lot of other comments where people are like, yeah, like let's do something, because I mean, let's face it, the downtown area is kind of dead. Like, I mean, sometimes it's hopping, if a festival or something's going on, no doubt. But also at the same time, a lot of times, not a lot is happening. So just some quick data on this. The Deck Plaza recently lost a $5 million federal grant. Okay, so that's not ideal. They're projecting that the total cost of this Deck Plaza would be about $200 million. But as of course you all know, things tend to come in over the projected cost. But in order for this to happen, it's basically going to take state, local, and philanthropic funding to make it happen. So it's not necessarily that the taxpayers are going to be on the hook for all of this. We're talking federal grants. Of course, we just hit a stumbling block there, but state money, local money, and then philanthropic, people who are wealthy, who just want to, see something happen. Recently, the El Paso Paso City Council did vote to direct staff to identify some possible funding sources. So they're still trying to make it happen here. It will not be funded by the Texas Department of Transportation. If the freeway is expanded, that decision isn't expected until early next year. So the deck plaza is still a potential thing that might happen, but sounds like basically they need to make sure they get the money secured to make it happen. So it's always a fun topic to talk about. Seems like whenever you talk about like development projects, it gets everybody riled up because a lot of people are like, "Yay, this is great! Like this is going to be cool," and then a lot of people are like, "No, change bad. I'm going to pay for this somehow out of my pocket." And so we can, of course, see the viewpoints on each side. So this one definitely is probably one where you're either for it or you are against it. So don't be shy to drop a comment on that. So, yeah.
I think Ryan says, I hope it comes to be as long as it doesn't add an additional tax, which I agree. Our property taxes are already very high, which I also agree.
Yeah, the property tax question, yeah, no doubt about it. Yeah, El Paso has high property taxes. There's just no other way to say it. So it'll be interesting to see if I think when they fund a project like this, a big infrastructure project like this, it doesn't actually affect your property taxes in any way, because remember, property taxes are essentially a handful of taxing entities. For most of us, not including Horizon, I believe there are 6 main taxing entities, and they each have a specific tax rate that they apply to the appraised value of your home. And so if a project like this was going to use taxpayer money, I think it would probably have to go to a voter referendum and, be handled that way. But then I guess maybe it would be added. I don't know how it works. I'll do more research on it. But yeah, the old property taxes is always a good one. So we can't help you too much on that one. Death and taxes, as they say. So, Alex, anything new happening with you?
Not much. Just, I always say this every time you ask me. I always say this, but the weather. I'm just so like, I used to live in Portland, so the weather was a main thing. So I think I'm just used to, being sensitive about what type of weather we have. I already got used to the weather in El Paso. So for me, when it's not that cold compared to what I used to be, I'm cold. So right now I'm enjoying that we're kind of getting away from the cold weather, and I'm excited for summer. Even though when it's summer, I'm gonna complain how hot it is. So I'm never happy. But overall, that's something I'm usually looking forward to, just the weather when it's not miserable or cold. But other than that, I'm just excited. A lot of, like you said, a lot of growth. It seems to be not only in Juarez, like we talked a little bit at the beginning, but in El Paso. So just excited to see what the economy is gonna do, especially with this new changes. Obviously, we all hope for the best, but we don't know. But that's kind of what I guess it's really bugging me in my mind, just to see what's going to happen. But other than that, nothing. Just enjoying El Paso. Again, everybody seems to be nice as they were when I moved here. So yeah, I'm very, very happy to be here. Definitely.
Yeah. That's awesome. Speaking of the weather, we are coming into the windy season. March is typically pretty windy, and I was just talking with somebody the other day, and they were like, is it just me, or is like the windy season this person had grown up and lived in El Paso their whole life. They're like, it feels like the windy season is getting longer. Like it was a she was like, I think it used to be, it felt like it was only a couple of weeks in March. But now it feels like it's a couple of months, and I remember last year I did kind of think, I was like, man, this is like the longest windy season. So I'm not saying it's like climate change or anything like that, but it definitely does seem like the windy season is like getting longer. It's funny, in one of those pictures that you put for the one of the buildings, they took the arrow pointing at it. They took the picture during obviously what was a windstorm, and it was just like total brownout. Like sometimes El Paso can be beautiful. It's like sunny and gorgeous, but man, sometimes it can look like a disaster, like apocalypse zone. I think especially too over in Horizon. just because there's so much development and all the dirt and the sand blowing around, like it can get nuts. So yeah, windy season's coming.
It reminds me of one time I was showing houses in Santa Teresa during windy season, and there's a lot of new construction. It's like a plot of just 50 houses and then emptiness, and then they're building stuff. And I remember I was showing clients, and it was windy, so it was gross, right? There was just dirt everywhere, and they were like, "Is this how El Paso is all the time?" I was like, "No, no," and he's like, "Are you sure? Because this is not very enjoyable." So that's what it reminded me of. Ryan says, "I'm looking forward to the dust storm season ending, but yes, absolutely love the temperature these days. My ideal temperature is like mid 70s, 75, 77 is probably what I really like, but I am enjoying, a little bit of cold, not too hot. It definitely feels nice."
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, the weather temperatures have been great, and yeah, in a couple of months it's going to be back to being nice and hot. But hey, it's El Paso. So we're curious to. We'd like to try to do maybe one live episode a month. We don't really want to talk too much about like real estate stuff because quite honestly, most of you don't care. Like if you're like actively at the point where you're going to buy or sell a home, well, then you care. But we have plenty of content on that. But we'd love to like just kind of talk about just like kind of fun things that are happening in El Paso. So yeah, I was excited for the Juarez things just because it's interesting to see like what new stuff is popping up there. So, but if you have any ideas or suggestions for topics, by all means, please consider sharing them.
Yeah, and like you said, I mean, the main thing about doing these live episodes, because we can just do recording and put this live shows, but we want to do this to try to get, feedback from you guys. If you have any questions about, either the real estate market, El Paso, or about the topics that we're talking about. And we also love to hear your opinion, right? So we appreciate everybody watching. We appreciate everybody commenting. And like John says, we're going to try to do this pretty often when we find topics that might be interesting for you guys. And like I said, mainly so we can hear back from you guys because we really appreciate, obviously, all the support throughout the years. So let me just run more comment from Ryan. It says, definitely love living here in our new house. One thing we've noticed is that the new build homes in our area, they're being built smaller and more expensive than even a year ago when we bought our house.
Yeah, we'll probably talk about this. This is one of the topics I was thinking about for the next months. But I don't know. A couple of years ago, one of the first videos I made was about these ghost lots in Horizon. So super quick, 50, 60 years ago, this company, Horizon Land Company, I think, I forget the exact name. Basically, they scammed thousands of people across the world into buying worthless land in the desert. And now, people still have these lots, and I get emails and calls still saying, hey, is my lot worth anything? What's happening? Da, 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 da. And I'm basically always like, no, it's not worth anything. But interestingly enough, there's a new planned community out in Horizon called Verdancia, where their Hunt is a big developer here, really kind of the only developer here. And they're going to build, I think it was like 2,500 new houses or something. And so it's off of like East Lake and Darrington area. So I don't actually think that it's actually really in where these ghost lots are, but I am going to do a little bit of research just to kind of refresh, my take on those lots in Horizon. So we're also got there's a guy you should follow him on Instagram. His name is John Jasniak, Jasniak, and he's a younger guy who buys land, subdivides it, sells it. He bought this little town called Cornudas, where they have like little events and things like that. But anyway, we're going to get him on the channel here. Once the weather gets a little bit greener and nicer, we're going to go out there and interview him and talk about cheap land basically around El Paso. So that's going to be one topic. But last thing though, to Ryan's point, this idea that about what's kind of happening with new construction homes. He's suggesting that they're smaller and more expensive. That doesn't surprise me too much, quite honestly. I will go on record and put a little projection out about what I think is going to happen with new construction. I think that it's likely that right now most of the builders are going to basically try to wrap up all of the projects that they have right now, all of the homes that they're building, and they're going to try to sell them ASAP. We already see that by a lot of builders offering like huge incentives to try to get these houses, this inventory off their hands. And then I think builders are going to sit back and they're going to stop building for the most part, because there's just too much volatility right now as far as like kind of what's going to happen. Like if the tariffs happen, well, that'll make building supplies potentially more expensive. If there's immigration and that'll scatter the labor force, and so just an FYI, I do think that new construction homes, even though there's still a big demand, even when the interest rates are high, I think we're going to see nationally builders really backing off. There's an interesting thing happening with D.R. Horton, one of the country's biggest builders, where it was discovered that a lot of the top people, CEOs, things like this, have been selling off shares. Why would they do that? Because they project that the value of the company is going to decrease, and they're trying to get all the money that they can before it potentially does happen. So a lot of interesting things happening in the new construction world, but the idea that maybe the houses are a little smaller, that they're still more expensive, yeah, I'm sure that is true. But remember, even if the house is a little more expensive, the incentives that builders are offering right now kind of offset that. So, kind of the good and the bad.
Yeah, the incentives, like you mentioned, it's crazy, especially the homes that are move-in ready. Those are the ones that, during COVID, obviously there was nothing. It was like the demand was crazy. But before it was like, okay, we'll give you, let's say 6% of your contribution, but you have to go with a preferred lender. Now I see like any lender, 6%, well, $10,000 off the home. So like you said, it is definitely, slightly more expensive, but the incentives are sometimes like really good, for some people that are looking for new construction. So that's definitely, something to see. Like you said, the economy, how is that going to change? If they're actually going to stop building as much, what are they going to do? Because I do think they have a lot more inventory that they would probably want to right now. So
yeah, for sure. So Ryan, Emily, Randy, thank you guys so much for jumping in here. You probably saw the email that I blasted out like an hour or two before this, so appreciate you guys jumping on. Like I said, any suggestions or thoughts for future episodes, let us know. But other than that, I think that's pretty much it, and that's kind of all from me.
Yeah, like I said, we appreciate you guys stopping by, the ones that, are here, the ones that commented. Thank you for everything. And we appreciate your patience, because this is something that we're still trying to dial in, with the technology, the microphones, the cameras, the slideshows, all that. But like I said, we want to do this live in order to, like right now, get questions, answer your own comments, because we definitely are interested on you guys' opinions. So again, thank you for all the support. And yeah, we'll see you on the next episode.